I had 48 hours to save my life. Well, not my life exactly, but my apartment, my dignity, and whatever shred of a modeling career I was still clinging to. The eviction notice had been taped to my door that morning. Bright pink, impossible to ignore. I've been staring at it for 3 hours when my phone buzzed with the text from Marcus, my boss at Velvet, the kind of exclusive nightclub where bottle service starts at $1,000 and discretion is worth even more. We need to talk. Can you come in early tonight? Have an opportunity for you. Life-changing kind of money. I should have known better. Nothing good ever starts with a text like that. Marcus's office smelled like expensive cologne and older money. He was behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. The man standing by the window made the room feel smaller just by existing in it. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of tailored suit that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. Dark hair, sharp jawline, and eyes that assessed me with the same clinical precision I imagine he used to evaluate stock portfolios. Anna, Marcus said, gesturing me in. This is Adrian Green. Adrian, this is the young woman I told you about. Adrian's gaze traveled over me. Not leering, but thorough. I lifted my chin. I'd been looked at by men my entire adult life. I knew how to hold my ground. You're prettier than your Instagram suggests, Adrian said, his voice low and smooth. Not a compliment, an observation. You're exactly as arrogant as your Forbes profile suggests. Marcus choked on his drink. Adrian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. She'll do. The proposal was insane. Adrian needed a wife. Not a real one, God forbid, but someone who could play the part for a single weekend, Friday night through Sunday evening. A business associate named Mark Chen was flying in from Singapore to finalize a contract worth somewhere in the 8-figure range. Mark was old-fashioned, traditional. He only did business with married men, stable men, family men. Adrian had made the mistake of lying about having a wife 6 months ago. Now it was time to produce her. Why not hire an actual actress? I asked. He said, too much risk of recognition, too much ego. I need someone who can follow instructions and won't think this is their audition for a Netflix series. His eyes held mine. Marcus says you're smart, adaptable, and desperate. The first two make you qualified. The last one makes you reliable. My cheeks burned, but I couldn't argue. The eviction notice was still in my bag. What's the pay? $50,000. The number was more than I expected. $50,000. I could pay off my rent, cover my debts, and actually eat something other than ramen for the next 6 months. Plus, Adrian continued, whatever I buy you for the weekend, you keep. Clothes, jewelry, whatever's needed to sell the image. Consider it part of the compensation package. I should have asked more questions. Should have gotten it in writing. Should have thought about what I was really agreeing to. Instead, I heard myself say, when do we start? Friday night arrived too quickly. A car picked me up. Not just the car, a midnight black Mercedes with leather seats softer than my bed, and drove me to an address in a neighborhood where the houses hid behind gates and the silence cost millions. Adrian's home wasn't a house. It was an estate. Modern glass and stone, perched on a hillside with views of the city glittering below like scattered diamonds. I stood in the foyer, marble floors, a chandelier that probably cost more than my entire life, and tried to remember how to breathe. Your room is upstairs, Adrian said, appearing from somewhere. He changed into dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Casual. Still devastating. Second door on the left. There are clothes in the closet. Pick something for dinner. Mark arrives in 2 hours. You already bought clothes? I followed him up a floating staircase that seemed to defy physics. I had my assistant take care of it. She has your measurements from Marcus. Of course she did. In Adrian's world, everything could be delegated, purchased, arranged. The room he showed me to was bigger than my entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a bed that could sleep four, and the closet, I actually gasped. Designer labels I'd only ever seen in magazines. Dresses, blouses, shoes still in boxes. Everything in my size. I ran my fingers over a silk dress in deep emerald, and the fabric felt like water. This is... I turned to find Adrian watching me from the doorway. Something unreadable in his expression. It's yours. All of it. That's the deal. After he left, I tried on 6 different outfits before settling on a simple black dress that somehow made me look like I belonged in a place like this. When I came downstairs, Adrian's eyes darkened just slightly. "Perfect," he said, then more businesslike. "Mark will believe we've been married for 2 years. We met at a charity gala. You used to model but stopped to focus on your art, photography. We live here but are considering a place in Malibu. Keep the details vague, follow my lead, and for God's sake, look like you're in love with me." "Should be easy," I said dryly. "You're so warm and approachable." This time, he definitely smiled. Mark Chen was 60, sharp-eyed, and charming in the way of men who spent their lives reading people. He arrived with the briefcase and stories about his grandchildren, and he watched us like a hawk, trying to figure out if the mice were real or mechanical. Dinner was served in a dining room with a table long enough to seat 12. Just the 3 of us, seated close together at one end. The food kept coming, course after course of things I couldn't pronounce, but that tasted like heaven had learned to cook. And I was starving. I'd been living on protein bars and black coffee for weeks. So when they set down a perfectly seared scallop and brown butter sauce, I didn't nibble delicately. I ate it. And when the next course came, some kind of braised short rib that fell apart at the touch of a fork, I finished every bite. I looked up to find both men staring at me. "Sorry," I said, dabbing my mouth with the napkin. "It's just really good." Mark laughed, a big, genuine sound. "I like her, Adrian. Too many people pick at their food. Your wife enjoys life." Adrian's expression was strange, almost fascinated. "Yes," he said slowly, "she does." When I asked for seconds on the chocolate dessert, Adrian looked like he'd witnessed a miracle. After Mark retired to the guest house, Adrian poured himself a scotch in the living room. I kicked off the heels that had been slowly murdering my feet and curled up on a sofa that was probably put together by angels. "You did well," Adrian said, not looking at me. He believes it. "Because I ate my dinner?" I asked. "Because you were genuine. He's built a fortune reading people. If you'd been acting, he would have known." I watched the city lights through the windows. What happens if he finds out the truth? He walks away, the deal dies, and I lose a year's worth of negotiations. He took a sip. "So let's make sure that doesn't happen." "Must be exhausting," I said, keeping track of all the lies. His jaw tightened. "It's not a lie, it's business." "Right. Those are definitely different things." He turned to look at me then. "Why do you do that?" "What?" I asked, pushing up from the sofa to see his face more clearly. "You're not intimidated by any of this," he gestured around us. Should I be? Now I was amused. I may not have ever seen luxury like this, but to be intimidated by his home, that's just too much. Most people are. I shrugged. It's just stuff. Nice stuff, sure, but it's just vanity on a large scale. I paused. At least that's how I see it. Something shifted in his expression. He opened his mouth, closed it, finally said, "You should get some rest. Big day tomorrow." I stood, padding toward the stairs. At the doorway, I looked back. He was still watching me, glass in hand, looking more alone than any person should in a house that big. "Good night, husband," I said lightly. "Good night, wife," he called back. Saturday was a fever dream. We started with breakfast on the terrace, Mark joining us for fresh pastries and fruit, and I learned that Adrian actually laughed at Mark's stories about his early business failures. A real laugh, not the controlled smile he seemed to wear like armor. Then Adrian announced we were taking Mark to see some of the city in the private jet. Not a commercial plane, a private jet. I'd never been on a plane before, period. I pressed my face to the window during takeoff like a kid watching the ground fall away, and didn't care that Mark chuckled or that Adrian kept glancing at me with that unreadable expression. We flew up the coast, had lunch at a restaurant perched on a cliff, and I ordered the lobster, because why the hell not? When it arrived, I cracked into it with enthusiasm, butter dripping down my fingers, and asked the server what the green sauce was because I wanted to bathe in it. Mark was delighted. Adrian looked stunned. "Have you never had lobster?" Adrian asked quietly while Mark was in the restroom. "Once, at a wedding. It was rubbery and sad." I sucked butter off my thumb. "This is not that." His eyes tracked the movement of my hand to my mouth. The air between us suddenly felt thicker. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said. "You need to meet more people," I replied honestly. "Maybe I do," he shrugged. That evening, Mark begged off dinner, claiming exhaustion from the day we had. Adrian and I were left alone in that massive house, the silence suddenly deafening. I gestured vaguely upstairs. "Stay," he said, then softer. "Have a drink with me. We should talk through tomorrow's plan." We ended up back in the living room, except this time I accepted the glass of wine he offered, and then another. We talked about Mark, about the deal, about how we'd handle the final breakfast before his flight. But then we talked about other things. How Adrian had built his company from a single investment at 23, how I'd come to the city with dreams of modeling but ended up serving drinks to people living the lives I'd imagined for myself. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Coming here?" "Sometimes. It's not what I thought it would be." I swirled the wine in my glass. "But I'm stubborn. I keep thinking if I just work hard enough, want it bad enough, it'll happen," he finished. "I know that feeling." "Do you?" I challenged. "Seems like things come pretty easy for you." His laugh was bitter. "You think this is easy? I work 90-hour weeks. I haven't taken a real vacation in 6 years. Every relationship I've had has ended because I won't put someone before the business. I'm 34 years old, and I'm lying about having a wife because I'm too much of a workaholic to have actually found one." He met my eyes. "Does that sound easy?" "It sounds lonely." I couldn't look away. Those dark eyes were pulling me in. "It is," he admitted. The admission hung between us. I set down my wineglass and moved closer to him on the sofa. Not touching, but close enough to feel his warmth. "For what it's worth," I said quietly, "you're not terrible at this husband thing. You might actually be good at it if you tried." "I'm not good at anything that isn't work," he said flatly. "That's just sad," I told him, because that's how I felt. He didn't respond, just a slight shrug of his shoulder. I studied his face. The proud bridge of his nose, full lips. His eyes were so dark in the low light, and there was something raw in them, something that made my breath catch. I recognized the desire in his eyes because it mirrored mine. "Adrian," I whispered. He kissed me. Or I kissed him. Later, I wouldn't be sure who moved first, only that suddenly his mouth was on mine and his hand was in my hair, and I was climbing into his lap like I'd been thinking about it all day. Maybe I had been. His hands spanned my waist, pulled me closer, and I felt the groan that rumbled through his chest. The kiss deepened, turned hungry, and any pretense of this being part of the act burned away like paper in a flame. "We shouldn't," he said against my mouth, even as his hands slid up my back. "Probably not," I agreed, biting his lower lip. "This complicates things," he moaned against my neck. "Yep, it's a terrible idea." Even as I said it, my hips were already grinding on his groin. He pulled back, just enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine. "Anna, don't," I said. "Words will only make it messy." Something in his expression cracked open. He stood, lifting me with him, my legs wrapping around his waist. He carried me upstairs to his bedroom. Not the guest room I'd been staying in, but his, and laid me down on sheets that smelled like him. What happened next was not part of any deal. His mouth traced paths down my neck, while his hands learned the shape of me through my clothes. Then, without them, I arched into his touch, shameless, greedy for every sensation. When he finally moved over me, into me, I cried out and didn't care who heard. It wasn't polite or careful. It was raw and real and desperate, like we were both trying to prove something or maybe erase something. His name became a prayer on my lips. My nails left marks on his back. We moved together like we'd been doing this for years, not minutes, finding a rhythm that felt inevitable. After, we lay tangled together, sweat cooling on our skin. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my hip. "That was," he started. "Yeah," I agreed. He pressed his lips to my shoulder. Once, twice. Like he was memorizing the taste of my skin. I fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer than I had in months. I woke to sunlight and panic. The clock said 10:47 a.m. Late, so late. And Adrian's arm was still around me, his breath warm against my neck. Sunday, the last day, the end of the deal. Reality crashed in like a wave. What had I done? What were we doing? I slipped out of bed carefully, gathering my scattered clothes. Adrian stirred but didn't wake. Or maybe he was pretending, giving me an out. I couldn't tell and didn't stay to find out. I showered in my room, scrubbing away the smell of him, the feel of him, the memory of his hands on my body. It didn't work. Breakfast with Mark was torture. I smiled, made conversation, played the loving wife while my stomach twisted itself into knots. Adrian was perfectly composed, the consummate professional, except for the moments when our eyes met and something electric and awful passed between us. Mark noticed nothing. He talked about the contract, about his relief at working with a stable, married man, about how obvious our love was. Every word felt like a tease. When Mark excused himself to take a call, the silence fell like a guillotine. "Anna," Adrian started. "The quiche's really good," I said brightly, desperately. "You should try it." His jaw clenched. He said nothing more. The ride to the airport was the longest hour of my life. Mark sat in the front passenger seat, chatting with the driver. Adrian and I sat in the back, a careful foot of space between us. I stared out the window. He stared at his phone. Neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. At the private terminal, we walked Mark to his plane. He shook Adrian's hand, kissed my cheek, and told us we had something special. "Don't let go of it," he said, looking between us. "Real connection is rare." I thought I might shatter right there on the tarmac. The drive back to Adrian's house was silent. He pulled into the circular driveway, put the car in park, and sat there, hands still on the steering wheel. "I should pack," I said, reaching for the door handle. "Anna, wait." I froze. Waited. He said nothing. "Adrian, it's fine. The deal's done. Mark's happy. You'll get your contract. And I got a whole new wardrobe and enough money to start over. It's a win-win." "Is it?" The question was so quiet I almost missed it. "Yes," I lied. "It is." I went inside, up to my room, and packed everything into the new luggage that had appeared at some point. Designer bags for my designer clothes. A whole new life in matching leather. The car keys were on the dresser, to a dark blue Mercedes Adrian had said was mine to keep. The title was already in my name. Everything legal, everything clean. Everything except the ache in my chest. He was waiting in the foyer when I came down, my bags in hand. "I can have someone drive you," he offered. "I'm good." My reply was automatic. "Anna." My name was a plea on his lips. I looked at him then. His hair was disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. His expression was carefully blank, but his eyes looked as wrecked as I felt. Just hours ago, I was wrapped in his arms. Now we were more awkward than strangers. "Thank you," I said, "for everything. It was, this weekend was, I greatly enjoyed myself." I was rambling. I knew I was, but the connection between my brain and my mouth had been severed. I pressed my lips together to stop more random words from tumbling out. "You're welcome," he replied. Eyes fixed on my luggage, he said. "Goodbye, Anna." He opened his arms, and I turned, thinking he wanted to hug me. He thought I was reaching for a handshake. We fumbled awkwardly, his hand meeting mine for half a second before we both pulled back. He opened his arms. I went for a wave. We ended up in some horrible middle ground. And then I thrust my hand up for a high five that he caught with visible confusion. Our palms slapped together with a sound that echoed in the massive foyer. A high five? What was I thinking? We'd shared a bed, our bodies, our vulnerabilities. And we were ending it with a fucking high five? I wanted to laugh, to cry, to kiss him one more time. Instead, I turned and walked out the door. The Mercedes drove like a dream, smooth and silent and expensive. I pulled out of the circular driveway, down the long private road, and didn't let myself look in the rearview mirror. The new house, my new house, already bought and paid for, keys waiting at a lawyer's office, was across the city. Small by Adrian standards, a palace by mine. I drove there on autopilot, my vision blurring. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my new life, my face was wet with tears. I wasn't even sure why I was crying. I sat in the car for a long time, wearing designer clothes in a luxury vehicle parked in front of a house I owned, feeling more lost than I had sleeping on a secondhand mattress in a cramped apartment facing eviction. I'd lived a fantasy. I'd tasted a life I'd only dreamed about. I'd spent a weekend being loved, or something like it, by a man who'd taken better care of me than anyone ever had. My phone buzzed. For a wild second, my heart leaped. It was Marcus, checking that everything had gone well, that I'd gotten paid. I texted back that everything was perfect. I had a home of my own, a car, a new wardrobe, and enough money to actually live a comfortable life, and memories of the best weekend of my life.